Welcome to the second installment of the NP Unit series of the Purple Stethoscope, where I am finding nurse practitioners from all over the country doing amazing things to make healthcare accessible, affordable, and relevant. This week, I'll be speaking with Corinne Copeland, family nurse practitioner in Cypress, Texas, founder and CEO of Real Nurturing Family Practice. You're listening to the Purple Stethoscope. I am your host, Devyn Nixon, family nurse practitioner. None of the information in this podcast is sufficient nor intended to diagnose your personal medical issue, but there's a lot to learn, so let's start the show.
My whole dream about starting a business came 5 years ago. I started off in the ER as a pediatric nurse, but then I went into adults, and that's why I stayed for like the majority of my time. So I said, okay, I need to get back into pediatrics. So I went to Texas Children, applied, got a position there, and that's why I started working with nurse practitioners very closely. I saw what they did and really liked it. And so, of course, the entrepreneur spirit was still within me. And so then it changed, right? So I decided that I wanted to open up a clinic and be able to do nurse practitioner, family practice on my own. However, here in Cypress, it's very expensive to get a storefront. Right. And I started thinking to myself, like, hey, how can I do like mobile house calls? And I said it out loud, and one of my neighbors called me one day, and she's like, hey, my daughter was sick the other day, and I think I got whatever she have. Can you come by and I'll pay you? And I was like, yeah, sure. I already had a delegating physician. I had everything set up to be able to practice. I just didn't know how to actually do it. So I went to her house and I assessed her, and we just started talking. And I was like, I literally just said this out loud, that I wanted to start doing house calls, and then you called me. And she's like, well, why don't you do it? She's like, I think it's like an amazing idea. Went on Nextdoor, which is an app for the neighborhood, and made this amazing, just told them everything about what she had and how she dealt with it, how she felt about the service. And people started calling me from then. Wow. And then it just grew. So I've been in business now for over a year. I recently just opened up an actual clinic space. So I still do my mobile, but I also see patients there as well. And so I do like that. As far as the direct provider care, I didn't even know there was such a thing. I just wanted to maybe come up with like a membership for my patients that was affordable. Right. And so after I did that, someone told me about the direct provider care. And so I started looking into it. I was like, oh, okay. But I noticed that it didn't take insurance. Well, not everyone is going to want to pay cash. You have some that are entrepreneurs like ourselves who just can't afford insurance. And so they're like, okay, yeah, like I would love to do your direct provider care or your Prime membership. That's what I call my membership.
The fact that you have found a way to blend the two together so you really don't have to turn people away, that's incredible. I am always like, I bow low to people who can do house calls. I am so scary. I don't know what kind of pets you got. I don't know what kind of kids you got, but it's a wonderful service because transportation is absolutely a barrier. And when people are just so sick, like that's why I love telemedicine, because the last thing you want to do when you're sick enough to want to go in home is to go in. Yeah, so that's awesome. I love the word of mouth. So what made you want to do it on your own? Did you ever work in a clinic with other nurse practitioners and physicians and PAs? And
yeah, okay, absolutely. I actually worked for Texas Children Hospital, which is a big well, we have inpatient and outpatient facilities here in
Sure,
Houston.
sure.
It's the number 4 hospital in the United States. And so I actually work
Mm.
in the clinic aspect now. And so that's where I am full time. And then I do my patients in my business on my off days and before, after work. So
Wow.
I just, like I said, I just have always have had that entrepreneurship spirit. My dad was an entrepreneur. My brother's an entrepreneur, and I'm like, if we can do it on our own, why
Mm-hmm.
not? What? Who say that we have to work for someone? I'm grateful for working for Texas Children because it's an amazing corporation, and I mean, I've learned so much
Right,
from them,
right.
so and I think that's probably why I'm still there,
Yeah.
because of the amazing company that I work for, and it's a privilege even being there. But it's just in me to do
Yeah.
my own thing and do it my way.
That's awesome. It's funny how different people come to that decision because for me, I have no entrepreneurial spirit. I just it's funny. I used to tell my husband all the time, I'll punch a clock. I'll punch a clock all day. I want to know what my paycheck's going to be. I want to be able to know that it's coming and not depend
Right.
on whatever. But what I found in practice is people have to have a primary care provider or be in the hospital to get referred to me
Mm-hmm.
because my day job is specialty. I'm cardiology, and then they have to have insurance or prepay for the visit,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not the same prices as direct patient care or memberships. It's you're paying a hefty amount before you come through the door, or you're paying a copay, which is a specialty copay. So those tend to be higher anyway. And that's
Mm-hmm.
just to see me. And so for me, it was more like, not necessarily me wanting to have my own thing or not answer to anybody. It was just like there are so many people that I can't even touch.
Mm-hmm.
Especially I noticed that when I went from inpatient to outpatient because inpatient they were coming in through the ER and the ER doesn't turn anybody away. But then I wouldn't see these people in follow up and I
Right.
don't know what's happened to them. And I'm like, well, dang, maybe they just can't afford it or didn't have the insurance. So I love all these other options that we're coming up with for our patients for not just our patients, but for our communities to be able to say, oh, I know somebody and I have access to the services that they provide. I think that's just amazing, amazing. So you're board certified in family.
Yes.
So that means I have the same certification. So for the listeners, that is, I call it womb to tomb. And when I'm being bad, I say sperm to worm, But
Exactly.
yeah, you said something earlier about wanting to get back to kids. Um, working with children, pediatrics in the ER, and then working with adults for a while, and then wanting to get back to kids. What was that thing that made you know that you had to get back in a space where you were working with our younger clientele?
Well, because I was looking into doing chronic kids, and giving them a service that was not out in the community. Children who, may have had like diabetes type 1 or NICU babies that was able to go home but may have had a G tube, and they needed someone that was competent enough to give them feed-ins through that G tube.
Right.
And so that was the along the lines of my first business thoughts, ideas that I was having. And so that's why I wanted to get back into it, because I felt like I was away too long to be able to do it competently as a registered nurse. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think listeners, just to kind of make this make sense a little bit, inpatient setting is when someone is admitted to the hospital. And so they have a bed and a room. They may have a roommate, they may not, but they have access to all the care that's available within the hospital. And once they're discharged, more often than not, people discharge back to their home environment. So all of the things that they had at their fingertips, or they just could push a call light and ask for, they have to figure out. So I don't think it's very uncommon. I hear this a lot in our community of nurses that, there is a gap. There's a gap that we need to fill. We're keenly aware when people start readmitting that they don't have the tools to care for themselves or their children or their loved one outside the hospital setting. So the fact that so many nurses identify those needs and then are creating businesses to meet those needs, to me, that's community health, So I love that. And so you got back out, got back connected with the kids, and now you're in a space where anybody can come see you. So let's talk about that for a minute. Like, why would somebody stumble upon your clinic? Like, what's special about it? What's different about it? How do people find you? And what do you offer that they may not be able to find in the mainstream multi-specialty clinic?
Well, for one, I feel like, when you go to a doctor's office, for instance, you usually walk in, there's a room full of people waiting. Your appointment is at 1 o'clock, but you probably won't get seen until 2 o'clock. And then you have a quick 15-minute visit and you're done. And you're like, I took the whole day off for this, whereas I actually, I don't take walk-ins, so you have to make an appointment. I schedule my patients an hour apart from each other, so we can actually take time to talk to each other. Yes. I can get to know you. You can get to know me. I think that is important with treating a patient because they know themselves better than you can. Like, yes, we might be educated enough to treat them, but they know what complex situations they've had to deal with throughout their illness. They also know what they've tried, what didn't work, what did work. And so it gives you time to actually get to know that patient.
I watched my dad and my mom really, really struggle with all the hoops they had to jump through to go to the doctor.
Right.
Because when they were young, the doctor came to them, and they knew you, they knew your whole family.
Yes.
Like now we might be like, oh, what's your family history? What's your family medical history? But when you're in the home, you see daddy over there wheezing with a weeping leg wound. You kind of have an idea of what you're dealing with. You see what kind of food's in the cabinet. You see, the social history is really illuminated. It's right before your eyes.
It fits right in because we're going back to all about convenience. You have curbside pickup for your groceries. You have Amazon delivering all your stuff to your home. Now you can get health care right in the comforts of your home on your couch. Even if you have to wait because your provider is running late, so what?
You're at home. Yeah, you can do another load of laundry, put the dishes away.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you're not exposed to everything that's in the waiting area.
Yes.
Which I always, I'd be putting a mask on just because I don't know what you got. Like, it's not me.
Right,
but if I got to sit here, I'm not going to suck up whatever it is she's blowing out.
And, I just think of all the kids that come in because they have a cough that just started yesterday, and no fevers, but then they're in the clinic with 30, 40 other patients that probably got something worse than they do. So now tomorrow they're going to be sicker, right? Yeah. So when you go to the home, you get to avoid all of that. Yeah. It's just an amazing service.
That is an amazing service. There's no reason why we have to stay back knowing certain things in mainstream medicine just don't work for our patient population. We can really, change some of those barriers and step out and do something different.
Communities all over the nation have issues with access to care, having enough primary care providers for people to get in and be seen in a timely fashion. And furthermore, the cost of living is just so high that many people can't afford insurance, or to take a day off of work to seek care. Providers all over the nation are stepping out, just like Corinne, and starting their own practices to provide longer visits, more accessible visits through telemedicine, after hours, to provide longer, more accessible visits and more affordable visits for people just like you. Check out direct patient care in your area, as well as telemedicine. Maybe your primary care provider has a telemedicine option or late evening appointments. Some clinics even have weekend appointments. But there's always an option to be seen and get the help that you need. Corinne and I are going to continue our discussion, but we're going to talk about childhood obesity, something that has been increasing over the years to the point that now it's an epidemic. And we're starting to see things like high cholesterol and diabetes in young children. Did you know that your child should have approximately 12 well-child visits before their second birthday, and then every year after that? These well-child visits are very important to make sure your child is reaching their developmental milestones. It's also an opportunity for you to get connected to community resources and to ask questions. I'm back now with Corinne Copeland, family nurse practitioner, CEO and founder of Real Nurturing Family Practice in Cypress, Texas.
I love kids. I love adolescents especially. Childhood obesity, I think, is important, and I think is something that affects our community, especially.
Yeah.
Has quadrupled since in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I'm testing kids as young as 9 with high cholesterol and even diabetes type 2 because of childhood obesity.
What are some reasons that a parent should be concerned and bring them in? Is this something that you do at a well child check? Like, when are you identifying these kids, and how do you do that teaching?
When they come in for their well child checkup, we always do their growth chart and check the BMI once they get to about 4 years and older. And so what I'm finding is that children in the African American and Hispanic ethnicity, they are the ones that have a lot of obesity challenges. And I think a lot of it has to do with poverty and cultural beliefs. Of course, and due to poverty, there's not a whole lot of healthy food choices.
Right.
Also, healthy foods are just very costly. And so it's easier to go and buy junk food and hot dogs and nuggets and all the processed foods and feed it to your kids. And then, of course, a lot of those parents are working 2 jobs to make ends meet. They're single parents, and so the kids kind of eat whatever is available. It might be bread with just mayo, and a glass of milk. There's really not anything of substance there for them to eat. And then also cultural beliefs, because Hispanics and Caribbean upbringings, they believe that healthy is fat, especially when it comes to children. If the chubbier your kid is, the cuter they are and the healthier they're perceived to be. And if they're skinny, then the elderly people will say, well, oh, they're so small. Why you're not feeding them? You need to feed them and fatten them up, And I have a lot of parents that come in and they're like, oh, they won't eat. They're picky eaters. Need to give them vitamins. Well, no, your child is actually a healthy, normal weight for their height. And this is where they're supposed to be. So just keep doing what you're doing, even though she seems like she's not eating enough or he's not eating enough. They are eating sufficient. And I try to go over the types of foods kids should have a well-rounded, balanced meal with your grains, your proteins, the vegetables, fruits. They should be having at least five fruits and vegetables per day. And then I always give them the My Plate chart, which is a good representation of what our plates are supposed to look like. Often we have half of our plate is filled with starches, and then the other side, which is protein, and usually no vegetables, when really half of your plate should be fruits and vegetables.
Right.
And then a quarter should be your protein, and then the other quarter should be your carbs. That's not what we're doing. Most households do not eat
not what
vegetables.
we're doing.
No, they don't cook vegetables, and they're like, oh, well, they don't like vegetables. Well, you know what? When we were growing up, you had to sit at that table until you ate your vegetables,
Sure
or else
did.
you cannot. Yeah, you
And
was going to go to bed hungry.
Nobody asked what we liked.
Right. Yeah, no one asked what we like. It's like you're going to eat what was cooked, and that's it. And if you don't want to eat, you can go to bed hungry, you know? And now they're like giving them whatever, you know, oh, they want nuggets, so here's your nuggets, or here's your hot dog. And those are just really bad. So we start screening for cholesterol and diabetes at age 9. And I usually like have them follow up in 3 months if they're overweight.
So when you say you start screening at age 9, is that every child, or is this children who are higher on the BMI chart? What parents should know to ask for a cholesterol screening?
Yeah, mostly children who are on the higher BMI. If you're over 85%, on the weight chart or your BMI, that's when we usually start to screen. Sometimes younger if necessary. So if I see a child that's 8 and they are on the 95th percentile, I might go ahead and screen even then.
And you said you follow up in 3 months.
Yeah, because, you know, we wait a whole year because, you know, kids, they come, every year for their well-child checkup if they're healthy. So if I let them go a whole year, they could potentially gain another 20 pounds. Because, yes, I have seen where kids are gaining 20 pounds a year.
Wow.
And so I make them come in just so kind of accountability, right? I usually recommend at least 60 minutes of exercise at least 3 times a week. And that could be playing because I want them to be kids.
Yes.
And I don't believe in putting kids on a diet. It's not about being on a diet because they're children. They're going to grow. But we don't want them gaining 10, 15, 20 pounds in a year. We want them to be able to grow and maybe have their weight maintained and gain weight at a slower rate than they're doing by eating healthy and having healthy choices.
I love that you said that maintain their weight rather than having them lose weight. And I've seen a lot of unhealthy practices that later resulted in people being fixated on a number on the scale because they were put on their first diet at 11. But really what we want to do is make it fun, make them try these new vegetables and new fruits and get them playing a different game or a different sport that they're interested in. That's really key. We're not trying to make, you know, a 9-year-old gain weight. They are going to grow.
Right. Yeah. They're going to get taller. And so when the parents say, well, how much weight are they supposed to be for their height? No, it's different for them. Like when you're grown, I've been 5'3" forever. So I know that I'm not grown anymore. So when I start creeping up in my weight, I know like, hey, you don't have 2 inches to grow. Like you need to lose that weight, right? But with kids, I don't believe in them losing weight to diet because it's just not conducive to their mental health. And I want them to have high self-esteem. I'm not trying to break their spirit. I'm just trying to get them set up to make healthier choices for a lifestyle change because that's what it should be. Even with us, when we diet, it's just yo-yo diets. We're just going up and down because we diet for 2 weeks or a month and then we go right back to what we were doing 2 months ago. And so then you gain back the weight plus more. But that's not what I want the kids to do. I want them to learn how to eat to live and not live to eat.
Where do you start? Where do they start with making that change?
I usually talk to them about as far as them having access to foods.
Right.
And so I give them food bank resources. I also encourage them to go and try to get food stamps to be able to afford the foods. I also talk to them about just timing, right? So we're all busy. And of course, it's easy to pop something in the microwave, but you have like pressure cookers, those quick pots that can cook now in an hour. Like I just made some oxtails tonight in an hour and a half, and they were tender and falling off the bones, right? Not the healthiest, however, I use that as an example to show that's something that usually takes about 5 hours to cook on the stove.
Right.
That was cooked in an hour and a half. So imagine being able to get these things and cooking it in 30 minutes versus having to spend all day, maybe doing a crock pot where you cook it overnight, where they can wake up and have oatmeal for breakfast in the morning instead of getting a Pop-Tart that's full of sugar and no substance, right? So you can get like oatmeal cooked overnight and put some fruits in it and let it all cook, and you have all the natural sugars to make it taste really good. And they put it in a bowl and they go on to school with a glass of milk, and it keeps them full until lunchtime, right? So those are just some of the suggestions that I usually tell them is utilize these things that we have that is just as quick as a microwave, but can give healthier options.
Where will listeners be able to find you both in the world and online? You know, those that are listening and they're like, you know what, I really dig this lady's philosophy. Where can they find you?
Well, I have a Facebook page. It's Real Nurturing. So just like real and then nurturing. F as in Frank, N as in Nancy, P as in Paul for Family Nurse Practitioner. And if they look that up, they will find me on Facebook. I also have an Instagram page, Real Nurturing FNP. So they can find me there. And then I have an office that is on Hofmeister here in Cypress. They can go to www.realnurturingfnp.com. And they can get my address and phone number and do virtual visits anywhere in Texas.
And we didn't talk about virtual visits. We talked about brick and mortar and we talked about home visits, but can you speak to the virtual visits? Who is eligible for that? And they can get that information on your website, but who would be the ideal patient for that?
So let's see, patients like flu. People think like, oh, I think I have the flu. I need to go get tested. No, you do not. The rapid flu test is not that great. It is a 50-50. And so if you look like the flu, you sound like the flu, I'm going to treat you for the flu. Even if that flu test told me you were negative, I'm still going to do what I need to do regardless. Chronic illnesses. So if I've seen you already and you have hypertension or diabetes, and this is just like your 6-month checkup or your 3-month checkup to see how you're doing, we can do that virtually. You don't have to come into the office for that. Rashes. Sinusitis, adult UTIs. I won't do a child over virtually because, you know, it can be anything. But when an adult, you pretty much know what a urinary tract infection is.
Yeah.
And so I can treat that virtually. Can also do a perforated otitis media because there's actual drainage. And so I know that where there's perforation and drainage, there is a ear infection that needs to be treated. So many things.
That's a newer way of getting care, but I love it because it's accessible.
Yes.
It's accessible. Well, it's been so great talking with you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on and talking to the listener.
Thanks for tuning in. That was Corinne Copeland, family nurse practitioner out in Cypress, Texas, and founder of Real Nurturing Family Practice. Y'all, thank you so much for your responses. I was asking what you want to talk about, what you want to hear about, and I got overwhelming responses from you. Which brings me to next week's guest. You will not want to miss this episode. I'll be speaking with a registered dietitian. We are going to talk about eating. And I just want to give you a heads up in case you're like me and any talk about weight and food brings a certain level of anxiety, it's much easier than you think. See you next week. Thank you for listening to the Purple Stethoscope. I'm your host, Devyn Nixon, family nurse practitioner. You can find me on social media at DTheNP. That's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and now Patreon. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and share this episode, and then head over to Patreon to see how you can further support this work.